I'm joined now by Katia Mar, Vice President of Product Marketing at Onfido. And we're going to be talking about the relationship between fraud and identity verification as they continue to evolve in 2023. Katia, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you for having us over, Peter.
It's really my pleasure. I always really love to have Onfido involved in our events, and it's a pleasure meeting you. I want to get started by setting the scene for our conversation. So the fraud landscape, it's always evolving. Often in our industry, we sort of compare it to an arms race between identity technologies and fraud. How has fraud evolved in recent years, and how has identity technology kept up pace?
Fraudsters like to innovate, which is why I actually love this market, because it's never dull. It's always something new and interesting to watch out for. When it comes to identity verification, so let's say there are two kind of traditional components to it, which is biometrics and document verification. So in biometrics, that's where I guess a lot of fun things are happening, both on how the fraudsters are dealing with the innovating their attacks, as well as how the vendors are responding. So what we see lately is quite a bit of sophisticated spoofs. What the fraudsters would use to trick the systems to think that they're actual genuine people are using the 2D and 3D masks that they would put on when somebody is asking for a live detection if there is an actual person on the screen. Many of us have seen these fun videos where a celebrity, or say a president of ours or somebody else, is suddenly doing funny things on the video and saying funny things, and everything looks super real. So that stuff is called deep fakes. And it's not extra prevalent yet in the customer attacks that we see, but it is going to be in the future. So what we see more of is sort of cheap fakes, which are these deep fakes, but done in mass, at much larger scale, and they're not as sophisticated, but they're starting to pop up. There's also injection attacks. That's where a video stream is injected with a fraudulent data stream as well. So those are on bio side. On document side, so in identity verification, we ask usually a consumer to prove their identity with bio and document verification. So on document side, we see a lot of synthetic identity fraud, which is kind of a tricky animal, because that is a combination of real and fake document that is very, very difficult, especially for a human, to identify whether it's a real thing or not. So it would be an absolutely real looking document, but a small detail in a document might be adjusted. Say a birth date is different, or a name has a different symbol in it. And so we see more of that with COVID. COVID pandemic in general has increased the number of this kind of attacks. In general, it's about 41% increase on average level of document fraud, and more of this synthetic identity fraud is seen. What is important is for the vendors is to keep up, right? Keep up and put the solution in place that will deal with attacks, types of attacks that are already prevalent, but also find a way to predict what's next, because you never know what's going to come. And that's where machine learning comes in place. At Onfido here, we have the entire fraud lab of people who are scientists whose whole job, whole responsibility is learn in detail about these new types of attacks, digest this information, and incorporate it into our machine learning model. At the same time, we do this fraud report that we do every year. And what we've seen for the 2022, we've seen a lot of repeat fraud, which is usually an attack that is done by fraud rings where the same document or the same fake person is entered into the system again and again and again, with hopes that eventually the system will crack. And sometimes they do. So it's much more brute force approach, quantity over quality, that is impossible to catch if you as a business have a team of people that manually have to check those documents. So you absolutely have to have a technology in place that is able to deal with these large volumes. And artificial intelligence or machine learning is what's very, very helpful in this situation.
Absolutely. I'm really happy that you focused so much on the document fraud aspect of that, because what I want to ask you next has to do with that. We spend so much time talking about the importance of liveness detection, which you mentioned, but forged documents are a really huge part of fraud when we're talking about remote onboarding in particular. So my next question is, what does Onfido do to mitigate document fraud in this onboarding process?
Right, Peter. So you called it out first. The live capture is very important for the businesses to take care of. So when you're asking for your customer to use their document to verify their identity, don't allow them to use a picture that has been sitting on their phone, because it's incredibly easy to have modified a real document picture and use Photoshop to make something real looking out of it. Live capture is very important, right? So in live capture situation, a vendor like ourselves, we would be able to see that the document is actually presented live, that this whole action is noticed. But when it comes to document itself, there are two parts to it. There is data document check and visual document check. So on the data stream, we verify that all the data is correct and it calls out the real stuff. So there is for example, in the document, there will be like all the letters presenting different fields of information, but there is usually an MRZ code that codes in this information. So we check that it matches. Then in terms of visual document check, there's so much visually that you can get a sense of that can indicate to you whether the document is fraudulent or not, from the fonts to the colors to even the texture of the document. What Onfido deploys is the machine learning algorithm. We have Atlas is our machine learning system that takes something about 10,000 different combinations of micro models that are these pixel level trained mechanisms used to identify the tiniest little changes in the document that together comprise a sophisticated approach of assessing the document fraud. And if you think about for a global company or company that serves global customers, there are so many documents out there in the world. And there are some documents like in the United States, for example, or many Western countries where the document itself has so many security features that it's relatively easy or easier than in other countries to, by those security features alone, identify whether the document is fraudulent or not. There are also a lot of countries that have ink on paper type of documents that also we need to take into consideration, because those are the customers that you want to capture. So across this broad scope, it's very important to have a combination of approaches to assess the validity of the documents.
Yeah. I'm really happy that you mentioned all of these other documents. Like throughout the day, we're constantly talking about how it's a human right to have a digital identity, and that shouldn't really depend on what document you have. And so I'm glad that you folks are addressing that. You've outlined a very complicated system, so I guess the stat that I'm going to bring up next might not be too surprising, but it is kind of disappointing. So last year, Onfido released survey data that showed about 75% of businesses are willing to accept low levels of fraud during the onboarding process, which, I mean, might seem a little bit understandable given how complicated it is, but anybody watching this knows that's a big problem. So my question is, what's going on behind this compromise, and why is it a problem?
Yeah, sounds like, why would they, right? Why don't you just take the fraud out of the picture? I think it becomes a more of an issue or a question of a balance, and it's a balance between fraud, how much fraud you're willing to bring in, how much fraud you're willing to put up with, considering that fraud probably leads to some monetary loss for your business down the line. and customer experience, which means conversion, which means money you can capture from bringing in your customers into your system today, right? And lately, the customer experience is a very important thing. We're all living in a very competitive world where every business has a lot of competition. And so if you are in a place where you're putting so many checks in front of your consumer that they won't be willing to even go through this onboarding journey, then they will likely not go through it and you will lose the revenue. So fraud is inevitable, right? So it's about the balance. Let's take this use case. I was speaking to a fraud manager in one of the e-commerce companies recently. And so they were seeing a lot of fraud. 1 in 10 transactions was fraudulent. That's a lot of transactions to be fraudulent, pretty scary. So they put in some system in place, a fraud protection solution that allow them to move from 1 in 10 to 1 in 100. So much less fraud. So they celebrated, they had a party, they celebrated. However, they went back to the office 2 weeks from then. They started looking at conversion, and they noticed that in 2 weeks only, by changing the system, they ended up with 90% less conversion in 2 weeks. So now they're protecting themselves from fraud, but they see 90% less people getting through the system. So where do you want to be? So yes, of course, you need to bring in the right vendor to help you out with this fraud detection journey, but some fraud is still going to slip through. And anybody who tells you that they can protect you from 100% of fraud, assume that they're going to eat into your conversion. So when it comes down to risk appetite and balance, a structured approach is necessary. So for example, what we do at Onfido, every consumer, which are our customers, does not equate to each other, right? We enable our customers to set up different parameters for the types of customers that come into their system to offer them the unique journey they would go through depending on what they know about this customer. So if it's somebody who displays the least potential for fraudulency at the front, they should be very easily accessing the system. For somebody who comes with perhaps a more rare document or something is difficult about measuring their biometrics, you can add in another challenge. You can pull in some database data or do something that's a little bit more sophisticated in the end to make sure that this person is brought into your customer base or not if they display some signs of fraudulency.
Right. Yeah. I mean, you mentioned already that there are many vendors that are participating within this space, and the past few years, because everybody moved into these remote spaces, doing hybrid work, remote work, etc. We've seen a huge boom in the identity verification space. So my next question for you is, what are the key differentiators in this space, and how can customers, like your customers, make the decision when they're faced with so many options?
And everybody has a similar promise on their website. So I can imagine that it is a challenge. Understanding whom to pick. I think first we should set the understanding of what is important for the business, and understand what market they're operating in, because a lot of times these things are mandated at us. For example, governments are often mandating how the identity verification needs to be tackled. They're actively shaping the identity landscape and enforcing change. India, for example, rolled out Aadhaar EID. Singapore has SingPass, I believe it's called. Sweden has Bank ID. There's an emergence of these types of IDs that is disrupting the landscape, but today it's very fragmented. In Europe, there is eIDAS 2.0 now, and the introduction of e-wallets that prioritize privacy and consumer control. So businesses in Europe are also looking to ETSI's technical standards and have so many considerations that a business now has to contend with when growing their business online. To succeed, they need to find a partner that truly understands the unique challenges they're facing, local requirements. If you're a global business, if you're servicing customers from all over the world, even if you're a business here in the Americas or in Canada, where you are, Peter. It doesn't mean that every single person that's going to bring their business to you or open an account with you is going to be from here. They might be bringing business from another country and have a different document. So having global coverage that can help them scale in high growth markets and tap into that opportunity is important. So they need a vendor that puts consumer experience at the forefront, that also prioritize within the customer experience, the accessibility and inclusion, and is able to proactively mitigate bias. So these are all the levers that we're pulling in our products. Mm-hmm. There's also traditional coverage, speed and accuracy, speed like turnaround times and accuracy, integration, speed of integration, which in some cases is less than a week at Onfido, and the innovation. So look at the roadmap. Is this company looking to innovate and tackle fraud as the fraud takes different shapes?
Mm-hmm. It's really fascinating. All of this stuff, is going into essentially the first identity touch point when we're talking about the larger identity ecosystem. So my next question is about that larger ecosystem. How does identity verification fit into the big picture of digital ID, and how does it support other aspects of the ecosystem like authentication?
Mm-hmm. 5 years ago, when it came to onboarding, bringing new customers into the system, say if you're a financial institution, you go to a bank. That's all you get to do, right? So there's no bank near you that, or if there's like only 3 banks near you, then you have to pick among these 3 banks. Right now, it's a totally different game. IDV 2.0 today, everything is online, or many things are online. You still have an option to go to a physical location, and for some businesses outside of financial services, even more so. But let's take a company like Revolut, one of our customers. Prior to Onfido, their verification flow would take under 30 clicks, 99 clicks for a bank like HSBC. Identity verification breaches this gap. But that now we're talking about onboarding. Onboarding is important, however, because it's a base for a trusted view of a customer. So now when you go into authentication and further in, this foundation can be used to authenticate an individual. And what we find incredibly successful is using biometrics, and especially when in comparison to other outdated authentication methods, the call centers, the one-time passwords, the knowledge-based authentication that have proven again and again to not be very productive or very useful or very secure and very expensive too. In the future, and also now we're starting to see more of that, the increased focus on digital identity is and should include the NFC technology, which is the technology that allows 2 devices like your phone and a, say, payment terminal to talk to each other when they're close together. So all of that together is kind of where the industry is today and headed in the near future.
Yeah, it's very exciting. You mentioned previously that Onfido has these wide-ranging partner networks, and I know you do a significant amount of outreach. My next question has to do with kind of what you learned from all of that. How has identity literacy improved in recent years, and what aspects of digital identity still need education? I mean, we're, like you said, everything's really evolving in some interesting ways, but do people understand it, or do they still need to be educated?
I think we're all still learning, but there's certainly some factors that played into speeding up our learning, which is the pandemic, when things had to move online. So pre-pandemic versus pandemic versus post-pandemic is definitely accelerated the digital comfort. We also noticed that customers are much more receptive to biometrics. We did a study recently that showed us that 80% of customers find biometrics as a form of ID convenient and secure. But then it also all depends on where you are in the world. North America is probably a little behind Europe, which probably is partly driven by regulation and government slowing the adoption of such technologies. You only have to look as far as the well-documented controversies around ID.me, who partnered with the IRS and ran into huge issues with AI bias. But when I think about all of that, I want to stress that with the right partner, the business can have a luxury of thinking about the business and not this intricacies of identity verification, because the market is only going to grow, the complexity is only growing, and so with a trusted partner, you can outsource majority of this problem and just stay on top of regulatory requirements or compliance requirements that a partner like Onfido can also help with.
Absolutely. So we're almost out of time, but I have two more questions for you. The overarching theme for today's event is the road ahead for digital ID. And so I just want to know, from your perspective, what markets do you expect to be the next big adopters of digital ID?
We're seeing quite a bit of adoption already in financial services, large concept, and gaming and gambling, largely driven by regulations. All right, because that's where gods are telling us what we're supposed to do when verifying identity of our customers. EIDAS 2.0 states that by 2024, every EU state must make a digital wallet accessible to its citizens, which will likely accelerate European markets to adopt in terms of geography. There's also a bunch of digital first IDs. So it's IDs that don't have to be a document anymore. They exist in digital space. So some countries have adopted those already, and some are moving towards that. So we have Estonia, Singapore, Bank ID in the Nordics, Aadhaar in India. And back to the verticals, I think travel, hospitality industries are the ones that are consumer driven, consumer experience driven. So we see some fantastic developments, like, for example, Airside optimizing travel experience in the US for the American airline passengers through collaboration with TSA. That's kind of biometrics enabled. Those, I would say, are the first ones to go.
Absolutely. Yeah, we definitely are seeing a lot of the same thing as you with travel and hospitality as well. So that's all a very bright future. What role does collaboration and partnership play for Onfido when you're looking at potentially expanding into these markets?
Well, we have a luxury of having a customer-driven roadmap. We have a set of fantastic customers, global customers that have been helping us to shape our path and teach us on the way. And so we consider our customers our closest partners. At the same time, Onfido last year, we have pretty much transitioned from being a point solution offering document and biometric verification for identity to our customers and into the platform play, where we have a variety of different signals and trusted data sources and fraud indicators that together comprise the solution that our customers can take advantage of. That includes Onfido Studio, which is sort of like an orchestration tool behind all of that, that allows to bring in not only the solutions that Onfido is offering, but also external signals that can help identify an individual further in certain markets. So I think those partnerships in terms of technology partnerships and resale partnerships are very important for us as well. And we have instances in systems like Salesforce as well, if this is how our customers want to use us.
Of course, of course. Well, I mean, I guess that kind of brings me to my final question. First of all, thank you very much, Katia. This has been a great conversation. How can audience members get in touch with you if they want to learn more about what we talked about here today?
Easiest is our website, onfido.com, onfido.com. We also have a virtual booth set up. You can download our fraud report or take an interactive tour of our product in our virtual booth. Or you can just go to LinkedIn. We're pretty active there. You can simply search Onfido and we will pop up.
Fantastic. Yeah, everybody, you can take some time right now to click on the expo booth and go download that stuff. Katia, thank you so much again. I hope you can join us at some future events.
I hope that as well. Thank you so much, Peter.
Thank you.